The alien general, tall and imposing, stood in front of his troops with a grin on his face. His purple skin shimmered under the bright lights of the warship's command room. The general was proud. His species, the Dreadnought, had conquered many worlds. They were known for their strength and ruthlessness. Today was no different. Before him, chained and on their knees, was the prisoner, a small, quiet figure wearing a dirty cloak. The general's piercing eyes studied the prisoner for a moment before he burst into laughter. "This is what they send to fight us?" he shouted, his voice booming across the room. His soldiers joined in, laughing at the poor sight of the prisoner, who looked weak, fragile, and beaten. The general paced back and forth, his hands behind his back, full of pride. "I expected a warrior, maybe someone worth fighting. But this is nothing! A weakling who doesn't even dare to raise their head." The general enjoyed humiliating his captives. He believed that fear was the best weapon. The Dreadnought Empire had built its reputation on crushing the spirits of its enemies. And today, this prisoner, whoever they were, was about to face the same fate. The soldiers surrounding the general were among the fiercest in the galaxy. They wore heavy armor, their weapons glowing with energy, ready for combat at a moment's notice. But today there was no fight. Not against this small, broken prisoner. It was almost too easy. "Tell me," the general said, stepping closer to the prisoner, his voice dripping with mockery. "Where do you come from? What pitiful species are you? Do they send the weak to die first in your world?" The prisoner remained silent, their heads still bowed. This annoyed the general. He didn't like to be ignored, especially by someone he considered less than nothing. His sharp teeth showed as he sneered. "Look at you," he continued, walking in circles around the prisoner. "No strength, no spirit, no fight left. Did you think you could challenge the Dreadnought? Do you know how many worlds we've conquered? How many species we've destroyed?" His eyes glowed with arrogance as he stared down at the silent figure. The soldiers watched their general, smiling behind their helmets. They had seen this many times before. Enemies reduced to nothing before a single battle. The Dreadnought didn't just defeat their enemies physically, they broke them mentally. And this prisoner was just another victim, another weak creature to be crushed under the might of the Empire. "What's the matter?" the general asked, leaning down toward the prisoner. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you just too scared to speak?" Still no answer. The room was filled with the sound of the general's laughter once again. He stood tall, looking over his troops with pride. "You see," he said, addressing his soldiers, "this is what happens when you face the might of the Dreadnought. The strong crush the weak, and we are the strong." The soldiers cheered in agreement, banging their weapons against their armor. The general felt invincible. He had seen the prisoner flinch earlier when he first entered the room, a small sign of fear. He believed that this was just another weak being who would break before him, just like the others. But something was different this time. The prisoner's silence, instead of feeling like submission, began to feel unsettling. The general couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but he pushed the thought aside. After all, how could this small, silent figure be any threat? It was ridiculous to think otherwise. He took a deep breath and turned back to the prisoner. "You're pathetic," the general said with disgust. "Do you even know what happens next? I will crush you and your kind without a second thought. Your existence means nothing to me." The prisoner didn't move. They didn't speak. And that silence, that calmness, was starting to make the general uneasy. For the first time in a long time, a small seed of doubt entered his mind. But it was quickly overshadowed by his arrogance. "Get up," he ordered, kicking the prisoner lightly. "Stand and face your end like the weakling you are." As the general waited for the prisoner to respond, he had no idea what was coming. To him, this was just another victory, another easy defeat. He was too blinded by his pride to see the danger standing right in front of him. The prisoners slowly lifted their head, and for a brief moment the general thought he saw something in their eyes, a spark of something fierce, something dangerous. But it was too late for the general to realize what he had done. In his arrogance, he had made a fatal mistake. The room was filled with silence. The alien general, still grinning with arrogance. "Still silent, are we?" the general asked, his grin fading slightly. "You think your silence can save you?" He circled the prisoner again, his heavy boots echoing through the chamber. The soldiers around him stayed quiet, watching closely. Something was wrong, though none of them wanted to admit it. The prisoner's lack of fear was starting to bother them. There were whispers among the ranks, Rumors about certain species in the galaxy, species that could fight, species that were dangerous. The Tracknor Empire had heard these stories but never believed them. They thought they were unstoppable. The general stopped in front of the prisoner and reached out, grabbing the edge of the hood. "Let's see who we're dealing with," he said with a sneer. With a swift motion, he yanked the hood back, revealing the prisoner's face. The room fell into a stunned silence. The general froze, his eyes widening. The prisoner wasn't what he expected. This wasn't some weak, defeated alien from a conquered planet. The prisoner was a human. The general's breath caught in his throat as the realization hit him. Humans. The word echoed in his mind like a distant nightmare. His hand trembled for just a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. Or at least he tried to. The humans stared back at the general, their face calm and emotionless, as if the entire situation was of no concern to them. It was that calmness that unnerved the general the most. He had heard about humans before, stories from far corners of the galaxy, tales of their resilience, their ability to fight against impossible odds, their refusal to surrender. But no one in the Tracknor Empire had ever faced a human warrior. They were rare in this part of the galaxy, and the general had believed the stories were exaggerated, myths meant to scare children. But now, standing in front of a real human, those stories didn't seem so ridiculous. One of the soldiers shifted uncomfortably, whispering to the alien next to him. "It's a human," he muttered, fear creeping into his voice. The general heard him, and for the first time he felt a pang of doubt. "A human? Here? How could this be?" The general cleared his throat, trying to shake the fear from his mind. "A human," he said slowly, studying the prisoner's face. "I've heard stories about your kind, but I thought they were just that, stories." The human didn't respond, only continued to stare with those unsettling eyes, filled with something the general couldn't quite understand. Confidence? Defiance? Strength? It was hard to tell. But whatever it was making the general uneasy. He stepped back, trying to maintain his authority. "You're nothing," he said, his voice lacking the strength it had before. "Just another prisoner. Just another defeat for the Tracknor." The human finally spoke, their voice low and calm. "You don't know what you've done." The words sent a chill down the general's spine. For a moment he was speechless. He had faced countless enemies, conquered entire civilizations, and never once had he felt fear like this. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow. "What do you mean by that?" the general asked, forcing himself to stand tall. "You think you can intimidate me? You're nothing but one human. You think you can fight us all?" The human remained silent again, not answering the general's question. Instead, they tilted their heads slightly, as if they were studying him, waiting for something. The silence in the room was thick, the soldiers now shifting nervously as they exchanged worried glances. The general's temper flared. He didn't like feeling this way. He didn't like feeling unsure. "Answer me!" he shouted, stepping closer. "What do you mean by that?" The human met his gaze without blinking. "You'll see soon enough." The general's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure why, but those words felt like a warning, like the calm before a storm. He wanted to dismiss it, to mock the human again, but the fear was already growing inside him, spreading like wildfire. Without realizing it, the general had taken a step back. He looked around at his soldiers, trying to regain control of the situation. "Prepare the prisoner for transport," he ordered, his voice shaking slightly. As the soldiers moved to follow his command, the general couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. He had underestimated the human, and he was about to pay the price. The tension in the warship's command room had shifted. What started as mockery and arrogance now felt like a storm about to break. The soldiers who had once laughed at the prisoner were no longer so confident. The general's uneasy reaction to the human's presence had spread through the ranks like a virus. As the soldiers grabbed the human to lead them to the transport chamber, the whispers began. "Did you hear that?" "It's a human. They say humans never give up." "I've heard stories. Terrible stories." The soldiers exchanged nervous glances, their hands trembling on their weapons. They had fought many battles, faced powerful enemies, but something about the human made them feel vulnerable. The calmness in the prisoner's eyes, the warning in their voice, something wasn't right. Two soldiers walked side by side, their voices low. "I thought humans were myths," one said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're not myths," the other replied, eyes darting nervously toward the human. My uncle fought in the Outer Rim. He said he saw a human once. Said they fought like demons, never stopped, even when their bodies were broken. The first soldier gulped. But it's just one human, right? What can one human do? I don't know, the second soldier admitted, his grip tightening on his energy rifle. But something about this one. I don't like it. Behind them, the general marched in silence, trying to suppress the growing fear in his chest. His mind raced with thoughts. He had faced countless enemies, seen the fall of empires, but why was this human making him question everything? He kept telling himself that it was just one prisoner. There was nothing to worry about. But deep down, the general knew that humans were different. They had a reputation for being resilient, for pushing beyond their limits. And this prisoner wasn't acting like someone who had given up. "Stay sharp," the general barked, trying to regain control of the situation. "This human is nothing special. Keep moving!" But the soldiers weren't listening to him. Their attention was focused on the prisoner, who walked calmly between them as if they were the ones in control. The whispers continued. "I heard they destroyed an entire fleet once. They say a human can survive things that would kill any of us. I don't want to be here if this one fights back." The general clenched his fists, anger rising in his chest. He couldn't allow his soldiers to fall into fear over rumors and stories. He had to show them that humans were just flesh and blood, nothing more. "Enough!" the general shouted, stopping in his tracks. The soldiers froze, looking back at him with wide eyes. "This is a prisoner, not a legend! If you're afraid of a single human, you don't deserve to wear that armor." The soldiers straightened up, but the fear didn't leave their eyes. The general could see it. It was like a shadow hanging over them, and no amount of shouting could chase it away. The human had planted doubt in their minds, and now it was spreading. The human, still silent, watched the exchange without saying a word. Their calmness only made the situation worse. It was as if they knew something the others didn't, as if they were waiting for the right moment. One of the younger soldiers, barely old enough to fight, leaned toward his comrade. "What do you think they're waiting for?" "I don't know," the other whispered back. "But I've got a bad feeling about this." The general continued leading the group through the corridors of the ship, but the silence between the soldiers was heavy. They walked in formation, their eyes darting toward the human every few seconds. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the air was thick with fear. The general stopped again, turning sharply toward the human. "What are you planning?" he demanded. His voice was harsh, but the doubt was there. "Why are you so calm?" The human raised their head, meeting the general's gaze. There was a slight smile on their lips, barely noticeable, but enough to send a chill down the general's spine. "You'll find out soon enough," the human replied, their voice soft but filled with certainty. That was all it took. The general felt his stomach twist. He knew this wasn't going to end the way he had hoped. Something was coming, something he couldn't stop. As the whispers of fear continued to spread through the ranks, the general began to realize the terrible truth. The battle hadn't even started, and somehow they were already losing. The transport chamber of the warship was cold and dark, with metal walls that echoed every sound. The general stood at the entrance, arms crossed, watching as the soldiers led the human inside. The tension in the room was palpable, a mix of fear and anticipation. "Secure the prisoner," the general ordered, his voice firm. The soldiers moved quickly, binding the human's wrists with heavy metal cuffs. But the human showed no signs of resistance. They stood still, their expression calm, as if they were waiting for something. Once the bindings were secure, the general took a step back, trying to hide the unease creeping into his mind. "What are you waiting for?" he snapped at his soldiers. "Get ready! This is just a precaution." The soldiers shuffled nervously, adjusting their grips on their weapons. The general felt their eyes shift toward the human, who seemed unfazed by the situation. He tried to ignore the nagging feeling that something terrible was about to happen. "Is everyone ready?" the general asked, raising his voice. "We will take this human to the holding cells and then begin the interrogation. There's no need to worry." But the soldiers weren't convinced. They glanced at each other, and the whispers started again. "What if the human fights back?" one soldier muttered. "Yeah, what if they're not just some weak prisoner?" another replied, his eyes wide with fear. The general felt anger boil inside him. "Stop talking! You are soldiers of the Dreadnought Empire. Act like it!" He turned to face the human, trying to project confidence. "You think you can scare us? You're nothing but a prisoner! The human simply smiled, a small, knowing smile that sent chills down the general's spine. "You don't understand," they replied, their voice low but steady. "You've made a mistake." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. The general tried to shake it off, but the atmosphere in the room shifted. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and alarms blared throughout the ship. Red lights flashed, casting eerie shadows across the chamber. "What's happening?" the general shouted, panic rising in his chest. Soldiers scrambled to check their consoles, faces pale and anxious. "Sir, we have a breach in the main power grid," one soldier yelled, fingers flying across the control panel. "Systems are failing! We need to secure the ship." The general's mind raced. Was this part of the humans' plan? How could they have orchestrated this from a cell? "Get that prisoner out of here," he ordered, desperation creeping into his voice. "We need to find out what's going on." But before anyone could react, the human surged forward with surprising speed. The general's eyes widened as the prisoner broke free from their restraints, moving like a flash of lightning. In an instant, they knocked aside the closest soldier and grabbed his weapon. "Stop!" the general yelled, drawing his own weapon. But the human was quicker. They spun around, leveling the soldier's energy rifle at the general and fired. The blast hit the wall behind him, sending sparks flying. The soldiers froze, fear written on their faces. The general could hardly comprehend what was happening. "Shoot!" he shouted, but his voice was lost in the chaos. The human darted across the chamber, moving with agility that caught everyone off guard. They dodged blasts from the other soldiers who were struggling to regain their composure. It was clear now. This was no ordinary prisoner. "Seal the exits!" the general shouted, trying to maintain control. "Don't let them escape!" But the human was already making their way toward the nearest exit, moving with purpose. They fired again, striking another soldier who crumpled to the ground, stunned. The panic among the ranks grew as the soldiers struggled to adapt to the sudden change in the situation. "Fall back! Fall back!" the general commanded, but the soldiers were hesitant. The fear had taken hold, and they were no longer the fierce warriors they had been moments before. The human reached the door controls, smashing the panel with the rifle. The door slid open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. Without hesitation, they sprinted into the shadows. "After them!" the general shouted, but he felt his authority slipping. The soldiers exchanged worried glances, unsure of what to do. As the human disappeared into the corridor, the general realized that this was no longer about capturing a prisoner. It was a battle for survival. The human had turned the tide, and now they were on the run, armed and dangerous. The general clenched his fists, anger and frustration boiling inside him. He had underestimated the human, and now they were causing chaos on his ship. "We need to regroup," he ordered, taking a deep breath. "We'll find that human, and we will end this before it's too late." But deep down, he knew that they were in deeper trouble than he had ever imagined. The human was no longer just a prisoner. They had become a force to be reckoned with. And the general's confidence was rapidly slipping away. The hallways of the warship buzzed with chaos. Alarms blared, red lights flashed, and soldiers ran in every direction, confusion written on their faces. The general stood at the center of it all, his mind racing as he tried to piece together what had gone wrong. Just moments ago, he had felt powerful, confident in his command. Now he felt like a puppet whose strings had been cut. "Reinforce the doors!" he shouted to a group of soldiers huddled near the entrance. "We cannot let the human escape! We have to trap them!" But his orders were met with hesitation. Soldiers exchanged worried glances, fear in their eyes. "But, sir, it's a human," one soldier dared to say. "They're strong and fast. What if they take us down one by one?" The general's jaw tightened. He had spent his life building his reputation as a powerful leader, a feared general of the Tracknor Empire. Yet here he was, standing before his troops, losing their faith. "Are we soldiers or cowards?" he barked, trying to regain control of the situation. "Act like it." But the words fell flat. Doubt hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating their morale. The human had not just escaped, they had ignited a fear that spread through the ranks like wildfire. "Sir!" another soldier shouted, rushing toward the general. "We've lost contact with the engine room. The power failure is spreading." Panic coursed through the general's veins. "What do you mean, lost contact? Get in touch with engineering. Find out what's happening." As the soldier scrambled away, the general felt a deep sense of dread settle in his chest. He glanced down the corridor where the human had disappeared. Every moment that passed made him feel more helpless. He had mocked the human strength, laughed at their supposed weakness. Now he realized that he had underestimated them entirely. With a deep breath, the general steeled himself. "Form a search party," he commanded. "We'll divide into teams and flush that human out. We cannot let this continue." As the soldiers reluctantly grouped up, the general felt the weight of their fear pressing down on him. He glanced at the fallen soldier from earlier, still lying unconscious on the floor. The sight reminded him of the stories he had heard about humans, their tenacity, their will to fight against all odds. He had brushed them aside, thinking they were mere tales meant to scare children. Now he was living those stories. "Why didn't I listen?" he muttered under his breath. "Why didn't I prepare?" His mind raced back to the earlier moments, to the way he had mocked the prisoner. The human's calm demeanor had seemed like a challenge, and he had responded with arrogance. Now he understood that the human was not merely a prisoner. They were a warrior, and he had underestimated the danger they posed. As the search team set out, the general found himself pacing the command center, anxiety gnawing at him. "We will find them," he told himself, but doubt crept in. What if they didn't? What if the human had already managed to rally others or found a way to sabotage the ship further? He suddenly realized that the human might have allies. If they could break free, they might have friends waiting in the shadows ready to strike. The general's heart raced at the thought. He had to act quickly. "Gather the remaining troops," he shouted, urgency flooding his voice. "We need to regroup and strategize. No more hesitation. We'll corner this human and take them down once and for all." As the soldiers assembled, the general tried to project confidence, but his insides churned with anxiety. They were tired, scared, and now they had lost trust in his leadership. He needed to regain their faith. "Listen to me," he called out, his voice steadying as he spoke. "This human is not our end. We have faced threats before, and we have triumphed. Together we will defeat this one." The soldiers nodded, some hesitantly. They were still shaken, but a flicker of determination began to spark within them. The general felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps he could turn this around. As they moved deeper into the ship, the general couldn't shake the feeling of regret. He had let his arrogance blind him. He had allowed fear to creep into his heart. Now he had to confront the human, not just as an enemy, but as a symbol of his failures. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that this was still his ship, his command. They would find the human. They had to. And when they did, he would prove that the Tracknor Empire was not weak. The hunt was on, and the general was determined to reclaim his authority. But deep down, he knew that this battle would not just be against a human warrior, it would be a battle against his own doubts, and he had to win it.